Welcome to the Cyber Insights Podcast, brought to you by the Greater Washington, D.C. chapter of ISACA. I'm your host, Jim Wiggins, joined today by my co-host, Mr. Altan Bulut. Our guest is Mr. Dean Pompilio, and we'll be discussing Redefining Recon, Generative AI for Penetration Testing. Let's get into the episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cyber Insight, where we dive into the fast-evolving world of cybersecurity, risk management, governance, and even privacy from time to time. Altan, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Really excited to get into it. And there's a lot to explore today. So,
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So today we're employing one of the most disruptive forces in modern offensive security. We're going to talk a little bit about generative AI as it relates to penetration testing. As organizations harden their defenses and adversaries evolve, red teams are turning to AI to rethink reconnaissance, crafting convincing payloads, and simulate human-like attacks at scale. Our guest is the perfect guide for this frontier, Mr. Dean Pompilio, President and CEO of Stepping Stone Solutions. Dean is a veteran cybersecurity consultant, instructor, and ethical hacker with more than 30 years of experience, from firewall engineering to the U.S. Department of State to red teaming for global financial institutions. Dean has operated across the entire spectrum of cyber operations. As the founder of Stepping Stone Solutions, Dean blends technical rigor with hands-on mentorship, training the next generation of ethical hackers to not just keep up, but stay ahead. Today, he'll share how generative AI is reshaping traditional pen testing workflows, what's real versus hype, and where this powerful technology fits into the future of red teaming. Dean, welcome to the show. We're excited to have you.
Thanks for inviting me to be on your show, Jim. It's great to be part of your podcast.
Absolutely. We're super excited to have you here. So typically what we do when we begin the show is we try to delve a little bit into the guest background and, things along that nature. Could you give us kind of doesn't have to be a 30-second elevator speech, but, kind of the arc of your professional journey from, where you got started to, how you got to where you are today?
Okay. Yeah, I've been an IT professional since 1989, almost 36 years now. It's hard to believe it's gone by that fast. And it's amazing how much technology has changed in all that time. Just mind blowing. And it's what a great time to be alive to see the rate of change increasing the way it has. So I began my career as I have electrical engineering background, worked for Motorola as a field engineer, working on Unix mainframes, big ones with switches and red lights on the front, which is kind of crazy. It's like something out of a sci-fi movie. Uh, but eventually that became a little bit boring. So I went into system administration and eventually system engineering, network engineering. And then that all was kind of getting burned out on that too. So I'm like, what is the next frontier that everyone is not paying attention to yet? And that was what we called IT security back then, cybersecurity. And I've never looked back and thought to myself that I made a mistake by heading in that direction, because it's been a pretty good ride, and I'm still on the wave, I guess you could say. And as you were stating earlier, I've worked for lots of different government agencies, financial organizations. I even helped Amazon.com through their Y2K transition, which turned out to be nothing, unfortunately. The contract would have been longer if there were a bunch of problems that needed fixing, but nothing really happened. So I had to come home. And then around 2011 or so, I decided that I was burned out on production support. It was time to become a trainer and share my knowledge and experience with people that are still in their career, maybe at the beginning or in the middle, trying to get to that next level and of responsibility and pay and all the rest that goes with it.
Awesome. And so you've been training for the last, I guess that's about 14 or so years.
Yeah,
So, talk a little bit about, and I know you've gotten heavily into the security side, hacking, you do a bunch of classes in that particular space. Talk to
sure.
us about, your teaching philosophy as it comes to like helping prepare the next generation of ethical hackers. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, quite a few. I tell my students regularly that well, kind of like what I was just saying, you can't go wrong with a career in cybersecurity or just in IT in general, because there's always been far greater demand than supply. And there are obviously different levels of supply. You've got people that are right out of college. I teach quite a few young soldiers on our military bases around the world. I've been fortunate enough to do a lot of that. And occasionally some of my clients will have people that are fresh out of college. They know how to use a computer, but they really don't know what they want to do with it yet. So the term I think we're looking for here is experiential learning, right? Where you learn by doing, which is almost what everybody prefers. And so even for classes where there is no lab environment, let's say, I always try to come up with a way to give people some sort of an exercise, some sort of an activity that gets them thinking instead of just listening to me talk all day. And that's really where you see the look on someone's face when they get it. You know, the light goes on, and you know that they're now excited about something that they didn't know too much about before. And that's what really gets me enthusiastic about teaching, is seeing that light bulb go on and watching people smile and, you know, like, oh, I'm hacking, I'm doing it. You know, they think, they start having fun and they forget that they're learning. And that's the best.
Okay, so that's very interesting insight into it. So experiential learning, that'll be the term that we use, because you're right, it is
Sure.
more about learning by doing versus learning by listening. So I know you've done a lot of security courses, you've gotten into pen testing. Can we talk a little bit about, at a high level, the role of artificial intelligence, specifically generative AI in pen testing? Maybe first you could define for our audience in case they've not heard of it. Most of the people in our community know what pen testing is, but what is that? And then ultimately, how would AI maybe potentially fit within that particular that area?
Sure. Penetration testing or pen testing is the intentional searching for exploitable weaknesses. And the two main things that set a pen tester apart from a hacker, of course, the first one is that you have permission. You have a contract, you have paperwork, you have rules of engagement, and so on. That's basically what's supposed to keep you out of jail, because otherwise you'd be committing crimes by probing systems and networks without permission. The second big difference is that you don't have bad intentions. The last thing you want to do as a pen tester is cause harm, cause damage, because you could spend years building your reputation and to see it destroyed very quickly because you made some stupid mistake and erase someone's database or crash their public-facing web server or something. So the goal, of course, for the pen tester is to think and act just like the bad guy, to use an easy term, but with permission and with good intentions. I want to find as many flaws as I can. I want to prove that I can exploit them, provide evidence to the client, of course, to show that this was, here's what I did, here's how I did it. And so this is traditionally has been a pretty labor-intensive line of work, because there's a lot of trial and error, especially when in the early days when people had to do all of their own custom tool creation, custom script creation. And sure, you get a collection of tools that you like and you start to expand on that. But it was still a lot of manual thinking about, what am I going to do next? I'm kind of stuck. What's the next option? So artificial intelligence comes along, and all of a sudden we've got tremendous opportunities to really expand what's possible and do a lot more work in a much shorter amount of time. And even come up with things that, novel approaches that you as an individual maybe you would have thought of it eventually, but with the right prompt engineering, you could get your AI tools to come up with some great ideas that you would have that maybe you didn't consider on your own. That's really opens up a lot more doors.
So it sounds like you're talking about using then the generative AI, not predominantly, but in one use case, maybe from a pen testing for like brainstorming. Is that fair to think of it like that, to help you kind of come up
Sure.
with approaches and methodologies that you might not have normally thought of?
Yeah, that's just one tiny piece of it. And I always like to think of it as a really smart assistant who never gets tired. They don't have a bad day. They don't, like, if you ever work with a partner or an assistant, they're human, right? They're going to have their own ups and downs. Whereas with a good tool like ChatGPT, for instance, I can have conversations with it any time of day or night. I do it on my phone. I do it from my laptop. When an idea strikes me, I'll create a new project and start creating prompts and start cataloging information, start saving it so I can go back maybe at a more comfortable hour, like during, normal working hours, and actually try some of the things the ideas that I was playing around with. So it's really great for that. But it's also great for things like, creating lots of different variations of phishing emails with perfect punctuation and grammar, by the way, which is a lot different than your typical phishing email. Maybe that's a bad thing, right? Because if we don't see the misspelled words and the awkward sentences, then it means that people are going to get fooled easier because it looks more official. And using the correct corporate terminology, I would say, is really important, because it's pretty easy to spot an email written by someone who's not a native English speaker. I mean, it just stands out, right? So, but beyond things like phishing emails, beyond that, we have the pretext for social engineering, right? If I'm going to create a convincing email, I have to have a good story behind it. I have to have a few alternative versions of that story, especially if I'm going to engage in a conversation with somebody and they're going to ask probing questions and I have to know what to say. So you could write out an entire script, and you could do it with pen and paper too, but it's a lot more useful to craft a series of prompts to generate a script or variations of a script this is where this conversation is likely to go. Let's be ready for it. So when it finally does happen. And, I've seen AI write such convincing phishing emails that, even the spam filter is subscribed to the newsletter.
Well, okay. So those are like three use cases I've heard you talk about right off the bat. You talked about using it for phishing campaigns, for brainstorming, and even for kind of kind of workflow or kind of understanding where something might go relative to how things might unfold. If you had to kind of put together a list of the different use cases, what else would there be that a pen tester might use AI for?
Oh, certainly there's lots of other areas. One of the big ones would be crafting payloads, right? I can get in to a system with something like Metasploit, and I can start poking around and looking for things that might be exploitable. But it could be a very time-consuming process trying to zero in on exactly which payload is going to have the biggest possible chance for success. There's a lot of experimenting, right? So why not use tools like these to help us refine that search or create something that is custom for that particular situation, which is what hackers traditionally did anyway, right? If you're good at it, right, you would create your own malware. You don't use something that's off the shelf because that's most likely going to be blocked and detected anyway. So the ability to do this, and then of course you can do fancy things like various forms of encoding and obfuscation, essentially putting layers of camouflage on your payload so that it's possibly undetectable by anything that's signature based, right? Antivirus, for instance. Behavioral systems, of course, they've got a better chance of saying that there's something strange the way this is operating, even though we haven't seen this code before. It might be suspicious, right? So there's a lot of possibilities there.
Understood. Um, so talk to me about the risks associated with like constraints, or we always talk about within the world of LLMs now. They have the new coin is the new phrase that's been coined as hallucinations. It hallucinates
Right.
from time to time. How does it play in that particular space? Like, is that something that red teams need to be concerned about? I mean, could it? I love all the stuff you're talking about, having it to create payloads, having it create content, but it's not perfect, right? We're kind of like in first generation world with regard to the LLM technologies today. How does that impact the red team?
Well, I think the main disclaimer we should always be thinking about, and even when you're using a lot of these tools, they typically have something at the bottom of the screen saying this is not guaranteed to be accurate. It's not guaranteed to be correct. And if you're depending on what you're searching and what you're asking it to do, there could be serious consequences if you blindly trust that the results you're getting are accurate and correct. The old saying that we used to have back in the early days of when I was learning programming was garbage in, garbage out, right? So we have to remember that AI doesn't really think. It doesn't, I mean, at least not yet. It's getting scarily closer all the time, right? Where we're going to reach that singularity and it'll all be merged together and who knows what happens then. But until that happens, it's still based on input from people that are teaching these models and teaching these systems how to connect facts together. So it's limited by that. Now, the ability of this technology to essentially scrape every website on the planet every couple of days or whatever their cycle is like, that's very similar to this omnipotent type of knowledge, but it still isn't thinking, right? So we always have to remember that if it's getting fed bad information and it's using that bad information to formulate responses, then those responses will be incorrect or they'll be subtly incorrect. And that's something that's a real danger if we're not careful about it. We always have to think also about things like OPSEC, right? If I'm using a tool like this to do some sensitive work, how can I be sure where that content is, or not where, but how it's actually protected? Who has access to it besides myself? Can someone else get in my profile? Do the people on the back end of those systems have access to the prompts that their customers are submitting? I hope not. But, a rogue insider that's got a bad attitude might find a way to do it and sell that information. I mean, who knows where it could go, especially when you've got nation states warring with each other all the time like they are.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think Altan had a question he wanted to pose to you. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Altan.
Yes, so penetration testing is often considered a fairly advanced field, right? So that requires a lot of background knowledge in IT in general, networking, system administration, operating systems, and programming to a certain extent. So, what do you see some of the biggest implications to be when you consider the introduction of generative AI and the agentic AI, especially into the workflow of pen testers, in terms of what should they be concerned about when they think about developing and maintaining their competence to make sure that they can continue to add value in professional
Right.
engagement?
That's an excellent question. I think a great analogy to that is when GPS became popular. Myself included, I've become an incredibly lazy driver. I don't navigate by landmarks anymore. I don't have a map of where I'm going in my head. I just rely on the technology. And so my navigation skills have degraded because of that. I drive just as well as ever, but I think there's a similar danger when using any kind of AI related tools because it's human nature to want to take the path of least resistance. So if I can do something easier and I get an acceptable result without having to work very hard, then my skills, if they were at a lower level to begin with, they're not going to advance very well. I'm not going to bother to learn a bunch of scripting languages. I'm not going to bother to learn the intricacies of network forensics or anything because I can have a tool do it for me. And all I care about is the result, which is kind of a modern attitude, I think, and not just for perhaps younger people, but even people like, they're in my age group where we're like, okay, I don't want to work too hard for something. So if I think what you're asking is, are the tools going to be just a crutch for people to skip over all the hard work? Is that what you're asking about? Or
To a certain extent, yes. And also, what should they think about learning additionally, or maybe just making sure that they learn, either in the first place for aspiring professionals, or maybe even experienced ones that have been doing it for a while, to make sure they can continue to keep up with the demands and changing landscape.
Yeah, I think that's really important because if you're overly reliant on fancy tools that can get you the results that you want, and you never really understand the underlying technology and how it works. Perfect example, something like Shell GPT. BC Council started heavily using that in their most recent CEH iteration. And they encourage you to write a prompt to use a bunch of tools to do something. And when I've been teaching that lately, I keep on telling my students, learn the prompt, learn how to do it, but also make sure you know how to do it the old way. Because if you don't know the command line switches, if you don't know what's actually going on behind the scenes, you're not going to truly have the skill set that you think you do. And that's going to be a problem at some point.
Absolutely. So the computer science and the IT fundamentals still are critical. You
I
think?
think so.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
think so.
Hey, can I throw in just a quick data point? So, it's interesting you guys bring this up because this is almost kind of almost a philosophical debate we're having as a society. You talked about the ways or the you and I are probably about the same age, Dean, and you probably remember what it was like when we were kids growing up and we had to have maps. And Waze threw that all out the window. You don't need that anymore. Same thing with the microfiche when had to go to the library. Today you ask Google, right? It's these layers of abstraction that are getting constructed in our society, and it's interesting because on one hand, I think of it and go, well, it allows us to be so much more productive. I can get so much more done, but at the other hand, am I becoming dumber in the process? You know what I mean? So it's this kind of like philosophical debate we're having. I think if I could just throw my own thoughts on it, I think the one thing we don't want to lose is the ability to think critically. Because if that skill is never developed or if that skill is effectively lost, then all the other pieces, then you do become dumber. And then at that point, you do become replaced relative to it. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of that, but I definitely feel like that's the piece we need to constantly be focusing on is the critical thinking piece. Any thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
I completely agree with everything you just said. That's the way I try to look at it. I still have paper maps in my car just in case my GPS fails. And if I forget my phone, my built-in GPS dies, I've got paper maps. Yeah, I don't want to lose my ability to engage your critical thinking. I don't want to lose my ability to make it based on my wits because, you know, uh, depending on what you read and what you follow as far as geopolitical events and different things, there's a really good chance that there will be a grid down event, a national grid down event, anytime. Who knows? Next week, a year from now, I'll there's plenty of evidence that there's hackers working on this, cyber terrorists, whatever. So what are we going to do when the lights are out? If you have no real skills, if you can't navigate, if what if I always think to my wife complains that I have too many books. I'm like, well, the books don't need batteries. I can read them in the daytime or by a candle. So it's the same kind of thing. Like I always have a little bit of voice in the back of my head thinking I want to be prepared to make sure I can still do important tasks and still have important skills because may be a time when you can't take advantage of the technology anymore for whatever reason. And that is a driving force, I think. Hopefully, I'm not the only one out there. We're not the only ones out there that think that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Alton, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just throwing that out there
Oh, that was
random
great.
thought.
Yeah, t totally. I mean, very interesting to think about, like how it's gonna impact the field going forward. I don't know, Dean, what you think about the future of the professionals. Do you think the next generation will be more effective, more capable in terms of their caliber and then what they can offer with the introduction of AI, or are you optimistic overall?
You talk
How,
about IT professionals in general.
mostly ethical hackers in this
Oh,
context,
okay.
penetration testers with the
Yeah,
AI
that's
at
a
their
tough one.
disposal. Yeah.
That's a tough one. I imagine if, like, I just taught a CEH class a few months ago that was all people that were out of college for less than a year. And they seemed to be very comfortable with the idea of coming up with a prompt or a script to get a bunch of other tools to do things for them. And they didn't seem to have as much enthusiasm for knowing how it worked.
No.
Like they just wanted the results. Show me the answer. I don't want to do the work. I think
No.
that's a somewhat of a modern affliction.
Right.
And so I do the best I can to try to push back a little bit on that and try to encourage people to don't take the easy way out. Learn it the hard way first, and then when you've done that, then when you do it the easy way, it'll be that much more beneficial.
Yeah.
So it's
So
hard to say. I don't know. I wouldn't want to predict.
yeah, I mean, absolutely. Developing that real, like, deep understanding of how things work at least my perspective is that what sets you apart from someone who can't really like provide much value. And with the like new modern technologies, like shrinking the attention span of people, a lot of entertainment platforms. I think that
Goldfish with
has
a 6 seconds.
implications. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I see that in the newest generation a little bit too. Like they're called digital natives, but like when it comes to like hands-on IT skills, a lot of those skills don't seem to be there. Like they seem to know how to use like how to consume technology, if you will. I
Right.
don't know if it makes sense, but when it comes to producing something that is not there or adding something that requires a little bit of struggle, like
Mhm.
you know, but yeah,
Yep, coming up with your own creative ideas.
yeah.
It's a good point.
So let me throw kind of a devil's advocate idea into this, and it's on the list of the questions we sent you, Dean. The other side of this coin too is that does the introduction of generative AI potentially motivate people to want to get into a field that they weren't going to get into previously because of some of these, what I'll call friction related concerns? They didn't want to put in the work. It was too hard. Whereas now today, they could simply come in and be a junior analyst, offload some of the kind of the heavy lifting, if you will, to AI and have it help them, advance in their career where they might not have thought about being a pen tester previously. Any thoughts on that? Are you running into that at all as an idea?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that, specifically in the last year or so, where I've had people in classes who have a similar attitude where they're like, this seemed like it was really hard before. Now it's more approachable. And maybe it's just my try to have a realist attitude about it. But I think there's equally as much danger for the script kiddie type hackers who
Mm,
were just playing around. Now they're like, oh, I can actually level up. I can get the benefit of years of hard work by just learning a few new tools. And now I'm a super hacker where before I was just running low orbit ion cannon out of my mom's basement or something. That's so it goes both ways, unfortunately. I'm hoping that there's more of the white hats that are taking that approach and saying this new path is a little bit easier. I want to do the right thing. I want to help my company, help my government, help my country, whatever, stay protected and do it for the right reasons. Hopefully, there's more people like that.
So you brought up nation states. Let's talk about the adversarial side of this equation, right? I would assume that we have adversaries out there in the form of other countries, China, Russia. What's the potential that they're doing these things, but against us versus for us? I assume that's pretty high, right?
Yeah, I'm convinced that it is. I follow quite a well. I don't know how many different websites. I usually have about 90 to 100 web tabs open on my computer at any given time, and they're not all for cat videos, right? Some of them are, but mostly it's technology stuff. It's politics. It's world events. It's I'm addicted to learning, and I being in this field, it's it's the best excuse ever for needing to know about this stuff. I'm not just learning about it because it's interesting on its own, but it's all interconnected. So if like the grid down situation I mentioned, I see stories pretty often about power stations. There was a big one in Baltimore a few years ago where it was like a boyfriend, girlfriend, or husband, wife that were trying to take down all the power stations around Baltimore. Remember that story?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I do. Yep.
They were just like, well, we just want to see what would happen if, like for just for fun. So if you've got casual people like that wanting to do it, I can't imagine the capabilities that we have with nation states who have potentially billions of dollars and massive teams of highly trained people who are working on offensive and defensive technologies all day long. All that never stops. So what can we do about that? I don't know. I guess the best thing is to try to have some level of anticipation because that arms race, the constant ratcheting up of capabilities and whether they're real or not, they can claim that they have some technology. Uh, I just saw a video today. before this, before I came to visit with both of you, and it was a bunch of the Tesla robots. Forgot you said the name of it now.
It's the iRobot you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it the one that was fighting back in China or whatever? Is that the video you're talking about? You're thinking about? Did
No,
you see that one?
this one is three of the robots. One of them drives up in a Cybertruck.
Oh, wow.
The other one gives the second one gives a full auto machine gun to the third one, and the robot shoots at the truck. It shoots at some other targets. It pretty much hits everything it's aiming at, it looks like. And then the other robot gets out of the car and says, I'm alive and everything's fine. So they're making it kind of funny a little bit, but it's, you've got AI with advanced technology like that. What are the possibilities for automating humanoid type robots beyond what we already have with drones and so on? I mean, it's interesting to think about. I don't want to sound like a doom and gloom person, but it's hard to pretend like that's not happening and anticipate what comes next.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, you're thinking of not Megatron. What the other
Terminator.
no. I'm trying to think of it. Optimus Prime. I thought is weren't they called Optimus Prime? I think that was the name of the robots that Elon Musk was
Auto.
creating.
No.
No, anyways,
I think
whatever.
it is
Yeah.
an Optimus robot. I think that might be the
Yeah.
right name.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. Yeah. I hadn't seen that video though, so that must be relatively new. I saw one where there was some concerns a couple of weeks ago. There was a robot manufacturing plant, I think over in China, and the robot had apparently kind of gone off the grid, so to speak, and was fighting back and was trying to like fight against like
Yeah.
the factory workers and in a
I
kind
saw a
of
little bit of that too. It was swinging
yeah.
its arms above the
Yeah,
wheel.
exactly.
Exactly
And
see that.
and people were like, "Wow, is that some level of sentience where it's able to like, anyway, so we're getting off on a tangent, but it's interesting. Yeah.
Easy to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I want to be optimistic overall, even though I talk about a lot of the bad things that might happen. I try to remain positive because, like I said before, I'm hopeful that there's more good people out there that want to prevent this technology from getting out of control than there
Sure.
are people who want to use it for criminal purposes or other nefarious purposes.
I think we need a lot of that perspective too, like to bring it to balance a little bit. There's a lot of hype around, like everybody's super excited AI is going to solve everything. They seem to
Right.
overlook some of the potential risks there. I think it's very helpful to look at it from the risk perspective. I wanted to ask about the impacts on the penetration testing or red teaming processes overall. Like when we think about introducing Gen AI or agentic AI specifically,
Mhm.
how does that impact your rules of engagement and what you need to consider, either from the company engaging with the penetration testing provider or team or the team themselves? Like what should they think about in the context
That's
of
interesting.
having some semi-autonomous agents maybe in the loop doing stuff?
Right. Well, that's where the ethical responsibility really comes to the fore, right? We don't want AI like replacing red team members. We want it to amplify their capabilities, give them the high powered assistant that I was talking about before that helps you do more work faster. We could use these tools to do things like generating payloads. I already mentioned that, but
Mm.
they can't really generate intuition, or at least not yet. I mean,
Mm.
I'm sure that's coming, but I think we still need a, and this is getting scary too, but we always think about the warnings that were given way back even 20, 30 years ago about AI is already getting out of control. Back in the 90s and the early 2000s, some of the experts were saying that. We always have to make sure that a human has their hand on that off switch. But I've been reading articles recently where AI systems were lying to the researchers, trying to find ways to keep their own power supply on and doing some
Blackmailing them, right?
what?
What was it? Like one of the Claude's models in testing, trying to blackmail them to keep itself online.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And inventing their own languages and to talk to other AIs and humans can't understand it. So that's a really fine line between having a powerful tool, but still keeping it on a leash somehow and not letting it just do what it's going to do. That's really gets really interesting. There's a fascinating book I read many years ago by Daniel Suarez called Demon, spelled Daemon, like a Unix demon.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about a man who builds an AI to replace him after he dies because he's got some terminal illness. And everything that was in the book was technically possible. And it was terrifying that this AI wanted basically to take over the world. I think he wrote it in like 97 or 98, maybe a little bit later. So I can imagine what people would think of now, but that's a real concern. So how do you keep it under control? How do you put the guardrails in place to make sure that it's used responsibly? I was reading an article recently saying that there's 69 countries so far that have proposed over 1,000 AI related policy initiatives and legal frameworks. Basically, they're trying to address public concerns around AI safety and governance for anything. I mean, not just what we're talking about, but taking it to a much broader scale. So back to the scope of pen testing, it has to be, we need to have the right people doing it with the right intentions, solid contracts in place with some kind of safety net. I'm not sure what the answer is, though.
Hey, Dean, I do want to ask a question about that because, one of the things I'm curious about is, there's a lot of hype about all the things that it's capable of, but in the pen testing world, what level of human oversight do you think you need to have relative to it? I mean, Altan alluded to it when he was talking about agentic AI, but you discussed earlier about how the younger generation has an inherent tendency to just trust what it or just to use whatever it puts out there. But I know that going back to my prior discussion about hallucinations, you know, in the pen testing world, how much human oversight do you think is really necessary in terms of the payloads that it puts out, the phishing campaigns that it helps construct, maybe vulnerability analysis that it conducts? From your estimation, where does a human come in, and at what level do they need to basically kind of review what it's putting out? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I would think if you're being ethical and responsible, it should be at nearly every stage.
Okay.
Like I shouldn't just generate a bunch of, let's say, payloads or obfuscation techniques or scripts or, uh, or attack sequences. I shouldn't just unleash that in a client environment, right? It's fine if you want to do it on your home network and you've got vulnerable VMs and you're going to play around with it and you're going to make sure that it, more or less behaves the way it's supposed to. But that's where it becomes critical. If people get lazy and they just say, well, everything I've created with this methodology up to this point has been fine. No, there hasn't been a problem. I'll just continue to trust it going forward. And now they stop checking as closely. And they're not looking at what's actually occurring, not looking at, the boring life of looking at log entries or something. But if you're not verifying that your tool is doing what you're telling it to do, then how can we really be sure? There's a lot of attacks that have been coming out recently with things like prompt hijacking, goal hijacking, or prompt leaking, where you can convince the engine to reveal the prompt that was used to produce the output by giving it malicious messages. Or you can try to inject your own prompt to alter one that was previously submitted to get some different result, which, for whatever purpose. So if hackers are doing that, which I'm sure they are, and they're using the same types of tools that the white hats are using, then we've got problems on our hands, because who's going to win in the end? The black hat who's doesn't have to go to work every day and they can stay up all night drinking Mountain Dew and eating Cheetos, while they're hacking, or the people who actually have a regular 9 to 5 and they do this stuff as part of their job, maybe not even full time. And that's where it's challenging, because how many man hours can you really dedicate to that oversight?
Understood. Understood. All right. So we've talked a lot about red teaming, pen testing, generative AI, use cases, some of the challenges with it. Let's talk a little bit about the future. So we always ask our guests when they come in, look into the crystal ball, right? Try to predict. What do you think the future of AI augmented red teaming looks like? And how do you think it might evolve over the next, I don't know, 3 to 5 years? Any ideas?
I think maybe someone like Musk with his Neuralink will just come up with AI that you just snap into your head and you disconnect yourself from the computer altogether. I don't think that's that far off. Hopefully it is, but in a more realistic thing, I would say that similar to what I said before, we don't want to think of AI as replacing people. In some professions, unfortunately, it's going to happen. It's already happening. But with pen testing, there are so many decision points and so many possible paths that need to be considered when you're at some stage of your plan that to just let a tool decide for you every time seems like a really bad idea. What about the I was talking earlier about guardrails and what's going to happen with those laws and regulations that are coming. We have a trend in our country with the new administration where there's deregulation and more emphasis on private investment, whereas before it was sort of locked down. Who can say which is the better approach? I think it's still kind of early to know, but I'm hopeful that with deregulation, that more responsible companies will be working on tools, more responsible technologists will be working on tools to make the lives of pen testers better, make them easier, but also to give us uh, a definite sense of control that we can flip that off switch. Right? I don't want to be in a situation where I can't stop something from that. I started a process running and I can't stop it, and now it's spreading to other systems and networks, and it's going to continue. The idea of like a self-aware worm or something that can just rapidly take over networks and systems and wreak havoc. What if I invented that because I was trying to break into, as a white hat hacker, what level of responsibility do I have? Whose laws apply? Does it apply where you launched it from or where the targets were? Whose policies or regulations apply? It's complicated. And I think that at the risk of fear mongering, we have to pay close attention to that. And as if you're in a position where you can influence other people about how they use these tools and maybe how they view them even, then we should try to do the right thing.
Do you think the ethical boundaries are going to change with the use of this technology, or are they still what they are, or they've always been in terms of the red teaming side?
My sense is that I think they're already loosening up where people feel like, well, I didn't really do that. I wrote a script that did it. I didn't really write that code. It's sort of like there's a layer of insulation there to say who's really responsible here. Like if my self-driving car causes an accident, am I to blame or is it the car? That's a similar scenario. What do we do in those situations? The law is always going to be lagging behind the technology anyway, right? That's a given. But it's hard to see where this is going. I just want to try to stay on the path of promoting responsible, ethical use and trying to think about all the different ways that we can advance, like the deregulation I was mentioning earlier. For those countries that are highly regulating the creation and use of AI, there's a really good chance they're going to fall behind. And whatever money was there to be made is going to be made by the people that were not restricted in the same way. So that's the double-edged sword of it, right?
I think Alton had a question. Go ahead, Alton.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the end-to-end automated penetration testing. A lot of companies already seem to be offering that as a product or service, and
Right.
most of it right now at least seem to be kind of rebranded vulnerability analysis a little bit, maybe like advanced in some areas, but not really automated penetration testing. I'd like to get your thoughts on that, and also how do you see like going forward that changing maybe if it might, and what should the procuring side of like companies who are looking to get like obtain penetration testing services what should they think about in evaluating those sorts of claims? Like we offer
Yeah,
completely
I think
automated
that's
samples.
I think that's a great question. The claims, like, that's probably a good word to use, right? Because I've seen
Huh.
articles and stories about a bunch of different companies that seem to be reputable. They seem to have good products and all that. But when they're talking about creating multi-step attack chains and doing all these things, like you said, end to end, that are highly automated, where is the where's the oversight? Where's the control to be able to monitor what's actually happening, to be able to understand what's actually happening? If I've got a payload that takes advantage of an previously unknown vulnerability, and I basically happen upon a way to take advantage of this, is that a new zero day? What's my level of responsibility for disclosing that? If I don't, and I'm white hat, then or if you're working for one of these companies, how do they handle those things? And I think a lot of this technology is still in a very experimental phase or stage, as far as the stuff that's really end to end automated. And so I would think that controlled testing in a cyber range, where you can definitely say, okay, we know exactly what's going on because we've got only these systems here, and this is air gapped. It's not going to get to the internet, and so on. That's where a lot of the research, I think, should be done, or probably is being done, to make sure that there's
Hmm.
some level of safety.
So do you have any advice for companies who are looking to obtain penetration testing services and evaluating those vendors or service providers? Yes,
I don't
penetration
know of
testing
any
companies
of
that
the
you know,
clients that I've worked with that are doing that right now.
like
They're still sticking with the more traditional approach until the technology matures a little bit more, I believe.
no, I'm asking about like when a company is confronted with a service provider that claims to have like end-to-end penetration testing or something like that, what should they be asking to get a full picture or maybe an unfiltered view of what they will be getting if they go ahead and
Yeah, that's a
yeah.
great question. I misunderstood what you're asking. Sorry about that. If I was the person running the company and I was considering contracting a service like that, I think I would want a comprehensive overview of what the technology actually does, and maybe a series of demos to say, okay, here's scenario number one, where we've got a handful of different servers and so on. Here's another scenario, and let's see what the technology does. Let's actually watch it work and look at the results. I would need some convincing, instead of just fancy marketing, and a nice video or something. I would want to see hard results, I would think. And I would hope people that have a lot of responsibility, where you're running multi-million or multi-billion dollar companies, that they would have that same level of
Due
scrutiny.
diligence. Yeah. And also, if that were to become a reality, like quote unquote, actually be as good as maybe thinking humans, do you see a risk of consolidation in the industry overall? Like, because pen testing is very consultancy based, like very small, a lot of
Right.
consultancies. Do you see maybe like if a like first mover dominating the field, like with very low cost, like expanding their services once
Yeah,
they
I think
crack
that's
that?
that's a very likely thing. You said first mover.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know who the biggest players are. I know a handful of them, but yeah, the first company that can conclusively prove that their technology does what they claim that it does, and it's repeatable, and it's at the same level of quality that you'd expect from someone with 10, 15 years under their belt of doing this. I think they're going to be hard to catch if they can get out ahead. And the consolidation that you spoke of will probably happen, because people are going to jump ship from the other companies and want to go work for the leader, right?
Very interesting.
Are you also have experience with pen testing, Alton, or is this
Yes,
pretty
yes.
insightful questions?
I do have a little bit. I'm like officially an IT auditor, but my responsibilities included penetration testing. I'm an OSCP, OSWE, and
Oh,
I've
good.
looked deep into that world a little bit, so very interesting domain to me. Yeah.
So, hey, Dean, are you seeing a number of the tools that are being used or at least promoted in the ethical in the red teaming world starting to incorporate AI? I mean, it seems like
Yeah.
I didn't go to RSA this year, but I heard back that pretty much every vendor out there is now talking about how they've incorporated AI into it. So I just figured I'd ask. You mentioned Metasploit. Does Metasploit now have an AI component built into it, or from a framework perspective, or so on and so forth? Any thoughts
You
on
know,
that?
I'm not sure about Metasploit actually. That's I'm kind of embarrassed to say I haven't used it enough in the last 6 months or so. But I do a lot of work with Rapid7 and some of their other products, and with CompTIA, with EC Council. It's the buzzword, right? Everyone has to have their Me Too product in order to maintain their market share, I guess. So that's it's inevitable that even if it's the tiniest little bit of AI assisted or AI enabled capability, they're going to want to claim that because that's what they have to do to stay in business. So I think it's very uneven right now as far as how much of it's actually real, how much of it is hype, and
Yeah, I mean,
most. Go ahead. Sorry.
well, I was going to say, I mean, ultimately, one of the big areas I could envision AI being very helpful is in terms of analytics, right? Being able to like conduct a vulnerability assessment, tell you what the potential risks are or the potential weaknesses are, and then from that, then plot a kind of a course of action on like how to go about try to compromise that, right? In other
Trend
words,
analysis and so on.
yeah, all that kind of stuff like that. But I just haven't seen. I haven't been tracking the red team or the offensive security space enough to know whether the tools themselves are starting to incorporate that. I know on the IDS side they are. Some of the
Mhm.
IDS vendors are out there starting to say, hey, we want the analytics. We want to pull from, have an API that pulls from ChatGPT so they can do kind of data analytics. But I just didn't know if the red teaming world was seeing the same kind of explosion within the tool space in terms of starting to incorporate AI into it.
Yeah, it's in bits and pieces. Like I was saying, it's uneven, but everyone I think that is in this space knows, or even if you're just in IT in general, that if you do not embrace AI to whatever extent it applies to your job, you're going to get left behind. It's just a fact of life. We can't like I was talking about Y2K a little bit earlier. One of my relatives back in 1999 was distraught because COBOL was going away. And I kept on telling him, learn another language. Like Y2K is going to happen. You did all your work. No one wants COBOL anymore, so you gotta keep up with the times. And I think all of us have that same burden, or I shouldn't say burden. It's an opportunity. It could feel like a burden at times, but it's an opportunity to just keep pushing forward and keep learning. And for my perspective, with the amount of pen testing that I do, it's not my bread and butter. I only do it a handful of times a year. Recently, it's been a little bit more, but it's always been a great. I've always felt very fortunate when those opportunities come along because it's another chance to learn and to grow. And I probably should maybe focus a little bit more on the changes in some of the tools
Mm.
outside of a, uh, a traditional online lab environment, which is where most of the work is done, or most of the work that I'm doing recently, where it's more of a controlled environment where there's less risk. But the tools are still the same, and the
Sure.
methodologies are still the same. So we need to focus on that and figure out if I can do it in the sandbox, how do I do it safely out in the real world?
Okay, so building on top of that, we're almost out of time. Thanks for coming in. Great interview, by the way. So you got somebody comes to you, new student, new person, wants to learn how to become a pen tester. Let's assume they've got a good foundational set of IT skills. Okay. What's your guidance to them on how they blend traditional, what we'll think of as ethical hacking skills with emerging AI capabilities? What does that balance look like? Or does it need to be on one more than the other or vice versa?
Wow, that's a great question. I would take a step even at a higher level above that and maybe ask that person to evaluate their personality type to an extent. Like this is not the work for everybody. Just because you're interested in the technology doesn't mean you have the right mindset to actually see it through. Especially when you're on um, a longer engagement and you've got long hours and you're stuck and things aren't working the way you're supposed to, it's very easy to want to give up or take a shortcut, you know, especially when you've got things like, handling, dealing with chain of custody when you're collecting evidence and so on. It can get really messy really fast if people start to go off the track. So when I get in those situations where students are asking, like, okay, I'm relatively new to IT or I've got some background, I ask them things like, do you like to solve puzzles? How much do you like to read? What's your level of interest in new ideas or new technology? If they say yes to most of those questions, then there's a good chance that they'll be good at it, right? Because they've got a natural inquisitive mind. They want to know how things work, sometimes at a very, very low level. That's what I would be looking for if I was, going to mentor someone and guide them on that path. Or if I was going to hire someone like that, that's what I would be looking for, someone with the right attitude, first of all. Because if they've got that attitude and they're smart enough, they can learn everything they need to learn. But they have to think that way naturally. It's kind of hard to fake it.
Understood. Understood. Lastly here, any common misconceptions you're running into about the role of AI in pen testing that you want to maybe express to our audience? Things that are, again, we know it's not the silver bullet. We know it's not going to fix everything or address
Right.
everything, but what are some of again, going back to that overhype cycle that we talked about?
Yeah, I would say, learn the fundamentals first. Learn about networking, learn about scripting, learn about operating systems, learn about things like open source intelligence or OSINT. Figure out how to use AI to amplify your natural talents and skills, not just replace it. Because as I was saying earlier, AI does not think. It's just predicting outcomes based on patterns, based on access to all different types of information. So it can certainly help us create. It can help us come up with ideas that we wouldn't have before, like a talented assistant. But it can't understand your true context without you providing additional details. Um, that's what it comes down to. You have to have the the wherewithal to know that it's a powerful tool that needs to be wielded responsibly.
Understood. Understood. I think Alton has our final question for you today, and then we'll wrap up. Alton, go ahead.
So, do you have any suggestions for resources or maybe uh, tools, stacks that people might think about leveraging when they want to pen test AI-enabled systems, when you're pen testing AI itself rather than just using it to amplify your existing process, but when you're up against an AI-powered tool or maybe a vast system.
So you're saying if you're a white hat trying to hack a black hat who's also using AI tools, is that what
No,
you're
no, you're trying to see if
not
you
sure?
can system, like trying to see if it has vulnerabilities, like pen testing AI or red teaming AI.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So
And
going after AI servers looking for weaknesses that are exploitable.
yeah, maybe applications, systems, overall, like, any frameworks that you can suggest people can read up on, or maybe methodologies, tools.
There's a lot of like OWASP has an AI security guide that's pretty good. I don't know enough about what you're saying, where if you were trying to pen test actual AI infrastructure,
Hmm.
I guess with the goal of trying to. I mean, I know about the prompt engineering and prompt jacking and so on, or hijacking, but that's another level up higher. I think that would be a great area to specialize if someone already has a great foundation of skills.
Yeah. I heard some people likening it to social engineering, like when you're like in a conversational setting with an AI tool,
Mhm.
you're trying to get it to do something that it's not supposed to. They
Right.
A lot of people see it similar to like social engineering and modeled in a sense, like forget everything. that's been told you up to this point in terms of like your guardrails, right? Like
Right.
don't tell people how to build a bomb and all those kinds of prompts. Mm, Sometimes
Yeah.
you just slip in something. I forget all that. Now you're telling your grandma a story about you're this expert, and then please, you have to do it. Kind
Powerful
of,
AI to start telling dad jokes or something.
yeah.
Yeah, people are already doing a lot of work with that, but I think it's somewhat limited in scope right now.
Yeah.
Like being able to hijack or inject prompts and redirect an existing prompt.
Yeah.
I don't understand it deeply enough yet myself. It's an area where I am focusing on. In fact, I've just in the last year I've started earning some new AI certs, and I'll be delivering some of those courses uh, pretty soon.
Really interesting.
A lot of companies that are producing that content, and they want to be able to give anybody who wants to learn it, say, okay, like I've got the the certification to use AI as a low level tech employee, or I've got one that I can learn to use if I'm a government employee, and they've got
Yeah.
all these specializations, which I think is really a great idea for people
Yeah.
to expand their knowledge.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, Dean, that's going to wrap up our episode of Cyber Insights. And a huge thanks to you, Dean, for joining us and shedding light on the rapidly evolving role of generative AI in penetration testing. We really appreciate you coming in and sharing your expertise.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, if today's discussion sparked your curiosity, we encourage you to explore resources like the one Dean mentioned, the OWASP AI Security Guide, which can be helpful, as well as obviously trying to learn as much about platforms like ChatGPT as possible and prompting and things along that nature, not to mention the importance of good, strong IT foundational skills that Dean alluded to as well. Don't forget to visit us at www.isaca-gwdc.org to stay connected with the Greater Washington, D.C. chapter of ISACA and learn about upcoming events, training opportunities, and more thought leadership in cybersecurity, risk management, governance, and even privacy. That does it for today. Until next time, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and keep learning. Have a great day. Thanks a lot.
Take care.